Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm bringing you a shady video. Today I'm bringing you my worst books of 2022. I had a pretty lackluster year when it came to reading. I just really did not enjoy a lot of the books that I read, which is very unfortunate. I'm not saying that every book I read ended up on my worst books of 2022 list. That would be unfortunate, but I've got quite a few here to talk about today. And some of these books I was highly anticipating. I was super excited to read them, and then I read them and unfortunate things happened, aka I did not like them. I gave all these books the benefit of the doubt. I read them from beginning to end. I didn't DNF any of them. So without further ado, let's get started. Here are my worst books of 2022. The first book on my list is probably going to be one of the more controversial ones, and that is The Atlas 6. This is also kind of a spoiler for a video that's coming out. I've got to read and rank where I read and rank dark academia books, and this is on that list, so you might know where it ends up on my ranking. But the setting here is the secret society of magical academic magicians called the Alexandrian Society. Members who earn a slot will secure a life of wealth and power, which is obviously a very alluring thing, a very tempting thing, something that a lot of people want. And we follow a set of magicians who are looking to earn a slot in the Alexandrian Society. First off, I'm gonna say some positives because I like to balance things out here. There were some things in this that I did like. First up, I liked the vibes. I was down hard for the vibes. I was into it. Aesthetic on point. There was something like oddly cozy about the atmosphere, like that aspect of it just nailed it. Everything else in the book though just kind of fell off for me, unfortunately. I think my biggest complaint with this book is the characterization. Each character had this like one very set role as to who they were, and they never stepped out of that, which sure you could say like, oh, well, they're just fitting this role. And like, I get that. But for me, that kind of put them into this like one-dimensional category where they were just this one thing and were only allowed to be this one thing and didn't make them like multifaceted. I feel like as a human, myself, and knowing other humans, everybody has so many layers. And these characters, to me, personally to me, my opinion, did not have very many layers. They were just very one-dimensional characters, and I could not stand that aspect of it. Like, I just wanted more from them. I wanted to see more of their layers. My other complaint is that things just did not make sense to me. Like, a lot of the magic things that happen in here, I was like, and I know that this book has a sequel now, and I'm sure it expands things, but there were things that were just like mentioned in passing in here where I was like, you're just gonna mention that in passing and you're not going to explore that? I just felt like the things that were just like mentioned in passing were like pretty important, and like the characters didn't even react. They're like, oh yeah, okay, moving on now. I felt like going into this one that I was going to be set up to really love it, and it just did not hit for me. It did not land with me. I did not end up in a place of love with this book, which is unfortunate, but to each their own. I can't love every book, that's okay. Next up on my list here, I have A Magic Steeped in Poison. This was one of my most anticipated releases of 2022, and I cannot lie, I was initially intrigued by this stunning cover, like, but then I learned more about it and I was even more intrigued by it because essentially this world is built up around tea. Like, the magic system incorporates tea, and I just loved the idea of that. Like, that alone was pulling me in. I wanted to know more. So in it we follow Ning, who has accidentally poisoned her sister with a poison tea, and this happens right after the passing of her mother. So you can imagine that Ning is pretty dang devastated. When she learns of a competition that's happening at the kingdom where the winner will have a wish granted by the princess, Ning feels like this is the only chance she had to save her sister. Some positives before we get to the negatives. First up, I really liked the writing style, and I definitely want to pick up more by this author in the future and give them another try, give them another chance. My other positive is that the magic bits that we did get, I was so enchanted by. Like, I loved those little bits where the magic came into play. The flip side of that, though, is that I felt like there wasn't enough magic within this book. I just feel like we got a glimpse of the magic and didn't really get to dive deep in, and I wanted to dive deeper. Other things that had this book ending up on this list is one, bland characters. We really only get to know our main character, Ning, and there are so many other characters that we come across throughout the story, but we don't get to know their stories. We don't get to know much about them. We only get to know surface level things about them. And I feel like had the characters been explored just a little bit more, like, I'm not asking for like full-fledged novels on their backstory, but just a little bit more about each of the characters, I would have enjoyed this book a lot more. It might not have ended up on my best books of 2022, but I feel like I would have enjoyed it a lot more. This book also also has that thing where the character doesn't really run into any kind of complications on her journey. We don't really see much of her struggles. A lot of the things that happen are very convenient. Like, things just kind of open up in a way where she is able to kind of soar through things without really any hiccups. And to me, that's always very frustrating because I feel like it's important to have those challenges to see character growth. And instead of her path being bumpy and having those little roadblocks here and there, it's smooth sailing the whole way through. I feel like overall this book ended up in a place with me where I liked the concept, but the concept was not executed well. Like, when I read the description, I was so enamored, I was so excited to get into it, and then I got into it and I realized pretty quickly, pretty early on, that it was not being executed in a way that was going to be pleasing to me. This book was quite literally just not my cup of tea. That was such a bad pun. The last 4 books I don't have physically because I either unhauled them or I borrowed them from the library. So let's get into those. Next up on my list, we have The Maidens. In this book, we follow a murder that takes place at a university. We follow Mariana, who becomes infatuated by the murder of this student, and she's going to do everything she can to get to the bottom of it. This student in particular was a part of the Maidens, which is a secret society built up by women within the university. Our main character quickly pins Edward Fasca as the murderer. He is this very charming professor who is loved by all. But the question is, why would he murder one of his students? And 2, how would he get away with it so easily? There are 2 main reasons as to why this book ended up on this list. One is that the main character annoyed me to no end. Like, she was so annoying! She is a know-it-all to a T, and I just can't stand people like that in general in real life. And so reading about a character that just feels like they know it all, that's how I felt about it. You know, it was just very frustrating reading from her perspective because girl, take several seats. The thing is, I tend to like reading unlikable characters. Like, I'm all for that. This one just did not work for me, and I think it's because her perspective just made the book so annoying. Maybe I have some kind of standard for unlikable characters that I don't even realize I have, but she didn't fit the bill. The other thing that really annoyed me is that I felt like this book was setting itself up to have this like big reveal, and then you get to the end and it's just so upsetting how lame of a reveal it is. You get to the end and you're just like, I put in the effort to read this book, and that's how you're gonna end it. I'm offended, and I will be talking to my therapist about this. Next up, The Children's Home. The story itself has this like very eerie feeling running throughout it, and it also has this kind of magical feeling throughout it as well, in a weird way. But I think this one ending up on this list comes down to really one thing, and that's because it's very underdeveloped. It is more of a novella, so it kind of makes sense that it's a little bit on the underdeveloped side, but I just feel like it did not reach its potential. There was potential there, especially in the beginning parts. If you've read this book, you know that the beginning part is fantastic. It's very enchanting, and there's just something about it that has you want to keep reading. There were seeds that were being planted early on that had this book heading into this like grand territory, but it just never reaches its full potential. I could see this book being similar to Every Heart a Doorway. Like, I thought that it was going to kind of lead into some kind of direction similar to this one, and honestly, had it, I would have loved it. I feel like had the author really had the chance to flesh this into a full-fledged novel, that we would have had the chance to explore some really interesting themes, because our main character has been through a lot. We just don't know a lot of what he's been through. We know like surface level things of what he's gone through, and I just really feel like there could have been a fantastic way to explore these things had this book been a little bit longer. Again, for me, this is a book where the potential was there, but it just did not reach its full potential. Next up on my list is To Paradise. This is the same author who wrote A Little Life. I always struggled with A Little Life. I ended up DNFing it and just spoiling myself for that book, but I wanted to give this author another chance because I really liked the writing style in A Little Life, and that was definitely reflected in this book. Let me tell you what it's about before I get to like the positives and negatives, I guess. This book is literally 3 books in one, and essentially what happens here is that we've got alternate universes within each story, but we follow a lot of the same characters, but they're not the same characters. They just all have the same names. All the stories are set in New York, and in the first one we are following David in 1983. He's set up for an arranged marriage, but his eyes end up being locked on someone else. Part 2 takes place in the 1990s, and we follow another David who finds himself wrapped up in an affair. And we follow him as he depicts his childhood while his father is dying in the hospital. Part 3 is the most different out of the 3. It takes place in like 2090, and it's definitely much more of like a pandemic dystopian style setting is what I will say. I did really love the writing style of this story. I feel like this author is very talented when it comes to the tone of her writing. It's just kind of fueled with like raw emotions and feelings, and it just feels very real. I don't know how to explain it other than to say real. Now, where things go bad for me with this book is that I just feel like there were bits of language in here that made me uncomfortable. I know that a lot of other people have felt that same way. I've read some other reviews. I'm not alone in feeling that way. I'm not alone in feeling uncomfortable. I feel like the author was attempting to be controversial at times. And I know that everybody's gonna have different takes on that specific part and be like, oh, the time period. But I'm just saying for me personally, I felt uncomfortable with it. While I did like that each of the books were kind of standalones and were bound together, and that they're all different in terms of characters, plot, and tone, I think for me personally, I needed or even longed to have more of a connection between the different stories. I think having some kind of weaving element that tied things together with each of the stories would have made the payoff feel more satisfying, but I also feel like that might have been too predictable of a direction for the author to take, and I feel like she was trying to go in a way that was not predictable, and to that she achieved. Another thing is that I just never really felt an investment within these stories. It's weird though, because I liked reading about the characters' emotions and the things that they were going through. And as the reader, I was able to kind of like feel those emotions and feel those impacts of the things that they were going through. But those moments for me were fleeting and I never found myself attached to the story itself. The last book on my worst books of 2022 list is Midnight Library. This story follows Nora, who decides that one day she is going to end her life. And when she does, she ends up in a library where she is able to experience parallel versions of her life, giving her a glimpse of how her life could play out in different ways. I know this book has helped a lot of people and I never want to intrude on that impact. So if you found this book helpful on your own mental health journey, that makes me so happy, and I'm so glad that you were able to find something within this book that helped you on your own journey. So take my words with a grain of salt and just know that we all have different preferences and different ideas, etc, etc. For me, I felt like this is a situation where our main character was just like suddenly cured of their depression, and it just kind of perpetuated this like false idea that all you have to do to get over your depression is just change your mindset and you'll be fixed. I just find it very harmful to sell that idea for people who continue to struggle with depression. But again, if you felt differently in the way that it handles depression and mental health, I'm not going to invalidate you, because again, we all have different ideas, all have different thoughts, and we all deal with mental health in different ways. So I'm not going to sit here and invalidate your experience. Your experience with this book is valid. It's just how I personally felt about it. The book itself is written in a very flowery way, and I am somebody who like loves flowery writing. Like, that is my style of writing. I love books that are poetic and beautifully written and just strung together with these crazy metaphors. And at times it was even too flowery for me, but that wasn't even the only problem. Match it with this kind of like preachy writing style and it just did not work for me. Also, I just felt like the author's messages were too apparent. I get that writing books is often an opportunity to kind of like show your point of view on different things within life, but I feel like there's a way to do that naturally where it doesn't feel like it's coming directly from the author. And this one felt like the author was just like very abruptly planting his own ideals and messages within the story. It pulled me out of the book each time. I was like, oh, here we go again. We're sitting in Sunday service and we're being preached to. Like, that's what it felt like to me. It was just very abrupt. And each time a new little message would pop up, I was just like pulled out of it. Not for me. If it's for you, that's great. I'm glad it worked out for you. You know, I think for me, it is very important to do these videos, to do these worst books of the year, just to show the fact that like, yeah, I don't love every book that I read, and to kind of give a different perspective, and to show that I don't just only gush about books all the time. Like, there are books that I don't like. But man, it is not fun to sit down and just pick apart books left and right, especially when you know that there's a chance that a lot of people liked the books that were on my worst books of 2022 list. But now I want to hear from you guys down below in the comments. What were some of your worst books of 2022? Did you like some of the books that were on my worst books of 2022 list? I'm a very open person. I love hearing different perspectives. So if there were any books on my list that you loved, let me know your perspective on that book. I want to hear it down below in the comments. If you like this video, be sure to go and hit that like button. If you want to see more bookish content from me, be sure to go and hit subscribe or go and hit that bell icon and you'll be notified every time I post new videos. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope your day is bright and tomorrow is brighter. Keep reading what your heart desires and I will see you soon with a new video. Bye, yo!